Hi, I'm Raj Thapliyal, a staff member at Digital Insider. When we talk about a computer, we never really consider all the past innovations and companies that have allowed us to get to where we are now. Names like Commodore, Tandy, and Apple II have faded into the past. Today, we're going back in time by asking 9 questions to Apple's 35th employee, Phil Roybal. We'll take an inside look of Apple like how it was back in the 1980s, including how Steve Jobs was really like and more. A huge thanks to Phil Roybal for having us interview him and enjoy.
Hi, I'm Phil Roybal. I was Apple employee number 35 way back in the day, in 1978.
First of all, how did they establish a company? Companies don't just grow on trees.
Well, there were several. One is nobody knew what a personal computer was. Nobody knew what you could do with one. And in fact, in those days, really, there was only one thing you could do with one, and that was to program it, which leaves out most of the possible customers in the world who are not programmers and don't want to be. So one of the challenges was to figure out why this thing would be appealing to the average person. Another challenge was we were a tiny company. We had very few resources. We had an initial investment from the major investor, Mike Markkula, but we didn't have a lot of name recognition. We didn't even have a building when I joined. So we were feeling our way, trying to make our place in an industry, and the industry was barely existing. There were about 43 companies making kit computers at the time, and we were one of them.
Next up, how was the culture like at Apple in its early days?
Well, in a way, and it sounds a little odd to say, Apple was kind of like a cult or a religion. You don't join a startup for the money, generally, because everybody winds up taking a big pay cut to go into a startup. I certainly did. But we were there to work on something that we found personally fascinating. Almost all of us had played with computers on our own before. And we thought that these things could have a remarkable impact on the world if we could figure out a way to make them accessible. So we were there to have a good time and change the world. And that contributed a lot to the culture. We enjoyed each other's company. It was a lot of challenges, overcoming the stuff that I mentioned a moment ago. And the fact that every day we were doing something totally new. We had to figure it out as we went.
After that, we asked, what were some milestones he saw at Apple?
Well, there were several. In the beginning, we had a system that only appealed to geeks. In fact, when you turned on the Apple II, it came up in a kind of machine language mode, and you had to know the right code to type in to get it to start speaking BASIC. So the VP of Sales and I, one of our first lobbying efforts was to get it to come up in BASIC, to get the engineers to change that, make it a little more user-friendly. We had one product that was going strong, but it didn't have a lot of supporting infrastructure around it. So the monitors that people could afford to use with personal computers in those days were television sets. You could get about 40 characters across on a television set, and the quality was not great. The storage initially was cassette tape, audio cassette tape, because inexpensive floppy disks hadn't been invented yet, really. The ones that were in existence were IBM 8.5-inch or 8-inch floppies that were expensive and difficult to use. So limited storage, expensive memory, the fact that the product couldn't do much, these were big challenges in the very earliest days. Later, the challenge was how to transition from the Apple II to the Apple III, which had all kinds of engineering challenges that ultimately made it fail and put the company into a severe cash crunch, and then the Lisa that followed it, and same thing there. So it was a big stretch to get from the Apple II to the Macintosh, which everybody thinks of as the Apple computer today. Well, I think Steve said it best, make a computer for mere mortals. When we started, computers were for geeks. They were for engineers who wanted to play with computers. And I think Steve Jobs had the idea that we could make something that appealed to normal people if it didn't look all geeky. So the Apple II came in a plastic case with a keyboard built in, ready to plug into a television set or a monitor, really ready to use. And it was the first computer that was that way. And then the human interface side was a strong suit of Apple's. We put a lot of emphasis into designing stuff that was elegant, was fun to use, and was pretty. So I think those are the big contributions in the early days.
The next topic, we asked how Apple's product design and user experience set it apart from other companies at the time.
Well, we actually had a czar of user experience, Bruce Tognazzini. That was his job, to make sure that what we designed made sense to not just us, not just engineers, but to the users that we hope to attract. And Steve Jobs had a very strong aesthetic sense and was bound and determined that the product would stand out in terms of both the user experience and the way it looked. So those two things, Jobs' strong aesthetic sense and Bruce Tognazzini's dictatorial control of the user interface, I think made an enormous difference.
Expanding on the subject, what makes Apple relevant in this modern day and age?
Apple's rarely the first to market, but it puts a premium on elegance. So Apple products, they just work and they work together, and you don't have to know much to use them. You can plug them in and a note that appeared on your phone will be there on your computer, a message you got on the computer will be there on your tablet. So they've tried to make it easy. With the walled garden of phone applications, they've tried to make sure that it's safe to use any app you can find on the Apple Store. Some people chafe at that because they want more freedom, but with more freedom comes more risk. So I think Apple tried to simplify things and make them elegant enough that people would identify with them, that using an Apple became a badge of honor.
And of course, the question we were dying to ask, what was Steve Jobs like?
Steve Jobs could be a tyrant. I liked Steve. He was the biggest thinker I have ever met in my life. I learned a lot from watching Steve. He just didn't see normal limitations, and he didn't see things outside of his goal. So he would go right here at the goal, and if you happened to be in the way, he would run over you, not because he was mean, but because he just didn't see you. You were just in the way of what he wanted to do. But he was a very big thinker and didn't hesitate to marshal any resources that he thought he could get hold of to make his vision come true. He was never afraid.
We asked what his most memorable experience was.
Well, one of my favorites was showing Robin Williams around the Apple Museum at our 10th anniversary. I got to spend an afternoon with him, and he was an Apple fan. He was using an Apple too. So I got to show him around and talk to him about his movies and his life. That one stuck with me. Same with Buckminster Fuller, also an Apple user. And I got to talk to him for a couple hours about his philosophy and how he used computers. And I think getting to the point where we had our own dealers and they were really carrying the message that we wanted to carry, as opposed to retailers who were carrying a dozen other products and we couldn't really control. I think those were defining moments where we could bring our vision to the world.
And wrapping up, what is his favorite Apple product?
I guess my all-time favorite is my iPhone. I have an iPhone 13 right now because it's always there. It does what I need and it works seamlessly with all my other gadgets.